in September of 39 BC, less than a year after giving birth to a daughter, Marcella, named for her late husband, Gaius Claudius Marcellus, Octavia Thurina gave birth to another baby girl whom her new husband, the triumvir Marcus Antonius, named Antonia. While pregnant with Antonia in Athens, Octavia noticed that her husband seemed to be the subject of a strange new ethos she hadn't witnessed while they resided in Italy. To the Hellenic peoples who dominated many of Rome's eastern provinces, Marcus Antonius had become almost an object of idol worship in a sense that was contrary to Roman culture. As a Roman, Antonius was expected to rebuke such flattery rather than exploiting it in order to pursue his consummate ambition, Rome's invasion of Parthia. Although the political views of Rome's ruling class women were under-recorded by the historians, it is worth noting that Octavia not only married a diehard Republican who opposed what her uncle, Gaius Julius Caesar, was doing to Roman government, but she had supported her husband as well, refusing to divorce Gaius Claudius Marcellus when that same uncle fought to make a match between her and Pompeius Magnus. But her political stance was also in the forefront when she threw her support behind Hortensia, the daughter of the Republican orator Quintus Hortensius, as Hortensia marched Rome's noble women into the Forum, publicly shaming Octavia's own brother and his fellow triumvirs for their unprecedented taxation of Rome's women, in a desperate attempt to raise the funds necessary to go to war against their arch-rivals, Brutus and Cassius. So it wasn't unusual for Octavia to be at odds with her brother. Although Rome's fighting men had dismissed the bad blood between Octavia's brother, Caesar Divi Filius, and Marcus Antonius as little more than a petty disagreement between Caesarian commanders, and had thus driven them to the negotiating table at Brundisium by refusing to engage in their personal dispute, it was, in fact, Marcus Antonius, as the elder of the two generals, whose way more closely aligned with Roman tradition. On the other hand, Octavia's brother represented a new political order. It had been Marcus Antonius who had agreed to call off hostilities between the legions and Caesar's assassins, hoping to avert another civil war. But Caesar Octavianus had wanted vengeance. It was Marcus Antonius who had initially resisted the deification of Caesar, while Caesar Octavianus was seizing any and every opportunity to associate Caesar with the divine, simultaneously elevating himself as the son of the divine. It had been Marcus Antonius who had endeavored to recall Sextus Pompeius, the last living son of Pompeius Magnus, to the Senate, moving to keep alive the representation of the Republican faction. Yet, at the creation of the second triumvirate, Sextus Pompeius, who was not even in Rome at the time of Caesar's assassination, found himself designated an enemy alongside the rest of Caesar's murderers, with his name added to the list of the proscribed. After their victory at Philippi, Marcus Antonius had treated the body of Marcus Junius Brutus with respect, but Caesar Divi Filius had demanded that Brutus's corpse be decapitated, so that the divine son might throw the head of Brutus at the feet of his father's statue in Rome. And even though the remains and personal possessions of Brutus did somehow find their way to his mother, Servilia, the defiled head of her son never did arrive in the capital, having been mysteriously lost overboard during transit. There was no denying that Octavia's brother appeared bloodthirsty, partaking in what amounted to human sacrifice, which was abhorrent to Roman society, by executing the so-called enemies of Caesar within the new god's temple. However, of the almost 300 who were slain before the statue of Caesar, not one was known to have ever even personally wronged Julius Caesar. Instead, they were slaughtered for having politically supported the rebellion led against Caesar Divi Filius by Lucius Antonius and Fulvia, an insurrection against the despotic rule of the triumvirs. And so, when the legions, the Senate, and even the people of Rome impelled Octavia to marry Marcus Antonius as a means of cementing the Treaty of Brundisium, her agreement to do so may have partially reflected her wish to leave Rome and to lend support to the Republican half of the agreement. But while away in Athens, Octavia beheld a Marcus Antonius quite different from the husband she had known in Italy. Octavia's husband not only seemed to revel in the adoration paid to him by the Hellenic peoples as if he were a god to be worshipped, but he also seemed to encourage it, even exploiting it as an opportunity to acquire the wealth and military support he needed to realize an exploding desire to launch his invasion of Parthia. And yet, though client kings and potentates from Rome's eastern kingdoms did travel to Athens and did pay handsomely for the support of Marcus Antonius, it was still not enough. Venturing into unexplored Parthian territory would require much more of both wealth and legions. As a result of the Treaty of Misenum between the triumvirs and Sextus Pompeius, some of those legions were owed to Marcus Antonius by Octavius' brother. But no sooner had peace been established between the triumvirs and Pompeius, lifting the blockade of Italy, than Caesar Divi Filius promptly offended Pompeius by divorcing his aunt, Scribonia Libo, driving Pompeius to renew his blockade of Italy. Not only was Rome's incoming grain supply jeopardized once again, but the blockade of Italy also meant that Octavia's brother could not transport the legions he had promised to her husband, a circumstance which made Marcus Antonius somewhat suspicious of Caesar Divi Filius, whose untimely divorce had suddenly created a major stumbling block to Antonius's Parthian agenda. Caesar, however, was equally suspicious of Marcus Antonius, who had agreed to surrender southern Greece to Sextus Pompeius, but had failed to willingly relinquish the revenue collected from the province. Each triumvir accused the other of being responsible for Pompeius's backlash in reinstating the blockade of Italy, while poor Octavia found herself trapped between supporting her brother and supporting her husband. As Octavia's husband grappled with constant delays in fulfilling his objectives, another situation arose to exacerbate his frustration. The general dispatched by Marcus Antonius to simply halt the Parthian invasion into Roman territories, while Antonius addressed the details of his own Roman invasion into Parthia, had not simply stopped the intruders, but had chased the Parthian invaders back across the Euphrates River. His chosen general, Publius Ventidius, had defeated and executed Labienus Parthicus at the Battle of the Cilician Gates and had defeated and killed the Parthian general, Pharnopates, at the Battle of the Olmanus Pass, all while Marcus Antonius was stuck in Athens, still planning his invasion. And the scenario had grown even more complex. After hearing rumors that Prince Pacorus's withdrawal from Roman territory was only temporary and had been for the sole purpose of increasing his forces for another invasion, Publius Ventidius had allowed misleading information to be leaked to Pacorus. The disinformation implied that Pacorus should launch his invasion at a certain point on the Euphrates River where Ventidius would not be present. Pacorus, however, was suspicious of the planted information and chose instead to cross the Euphrates further downstream. This was exactly what Ventidius had wanted, buying him the extra time to prepare his legions, which he did by equipping his heavy infantry and his slingers with small balls fashioned from iron. On the high ground near the town of Kindarus in Sehestica, Ventidius had carefully positioned his men. When Pacorus arrived, his horse archers charged up the slope. Using the same tactics he had employed during the Battle of the Cilician Gates, Ventidius's slingers forced the Parthian horse archers into a tightly packed formation, making it difficult for them to fight effectively. As Pacorus's light cavalry broke, withdrawing down the slope, they were pursued by Ventidius's heavy infantry, which engulfed the Parthian heavy cavalry, known as cataphracts, that had remained at the bottom of the hill. Keeping some distance, Ventidius's legionaries and slingers pommeled the Parthian cataphracts with iron balls, javelins, and other projectiles, killing many. The legionaries then moved in, heading straight for Prince Pacorus, who was identifiable by his expensive armor. As his army broke ranks, attempting to flee, Pacorus and the entirety of his royal bodyguard was slain by the legionaries of Ventidius. Anticipating that the Parthians would flee via the same route by which they had arrived, Ventidius had placed legions along the route and handily ambushed the men as they attempted to reach the safety of the Euphrates River. So for Marcus Antonius, who had commanded the Parthian invasion mostly in absentia from Italy and Athens, while his general accomplished the death of King Orodes' son and racked up decisive victories against the Parthians, there was little choice but to honor Publius Ventidius with the recommendation that the Senate grant him a triumph. As triumvir of Rome's eastern provinces, the credit for victory against Pacorus belonged to Marcus Antonius, but thus far, he had personally scored little more than an honorable mention in the unfolding Parthian saga, only causing his burning frustration and irritation with his wife's brother to deepen. Married to Antonius less than a year, Octavia already felt the pressure of being responsible to prevent her husband and her brother from dragging Rome into another civil war. And now that pressure intensified as she was confronted with a brother who had failed to deliver the promised support to her husband, whom she knew would never abandon the pursuit of his dream. If Marcus Antonius was denied the assistance he required for his continuing plan to invade Parthia, it was highly likely that he would decide to secure that support elsewhere, and Octavia would lose her husband to the Queen of Egypt.